Hi there, I'm your host Clive Serkin, and welcome to the Unstuck podcast, where we're on a journey to help you get control of your work environment, get yourself unstuck, and perform to your full potential. Today's guest on Unstuck is a poster boy for the story of Unstuck, and we're going to unpack that story soon. Spoiler alert, you're going to love this. I have Dave Rabie, the co-founder and CEO of Tovala. Did I say it right? Tovala.
No.
I screwed it up again. There you go. See, Tovala. An amazing company. I ran into them when they had the little pop-up store on Armitage. But it's a company that's reinventing home cooking. And if there's ever a story of Unstuck, this is it. So, Dave, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with this company. Tell me the story. What's it all about? And explain to everyone how to say this company's name correctly so they're not morons like me.
All right. So the company is called Tovala. It really is about reinventing home cooking, and that is where the journey began. I love to cook, have always loved to cook, and found myself without any time to cook anymore. And so I tried all the alternative solutions on the market to try to get a convenient meal on the table. But for me, nothing met the standard of home cooking. And for me, that meant raw ingredients, food that tastes great, food that has different textures, food that makes your home smell nice, all these little hallmarks of a home cooked experience, but especially the raw to cooked. And you can't get that unless you're willing to put in work. Even with a meal kit, you still have to do the work to get the food cooked and cleaned. And so that's what we built Tovala to solve was let's deliver on all the promise of home cooking, but eliminate the prep, the shopping, the planning, the cooking, and the cleaning. And so to do that, we've built a system not unlike Nespresso or Keurig, where we have an oven that cooks our food, we make the food ourselves, and we've built software that connects those pieces so that you can get a home cooked meal by scanning a QR code.
So, and like you're in so you said it, like you're in a space that is three different businesses: hardware, software, and food, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're in a category that is notorious for being a burial ground for companies that have tried and failed. And you've been around long enough and raised enough money, and you have the kind of numbers, both most importantly in terms of penetration and then depth of repeat, that would sort of qualify you as a success for sure. So what's different about you? Because I've seen a lot of companies come and go, and I've saw you when you guys came out and when I ran into you, and this is like 3.5, 4 years ago. I was like, boy, this is interesting, but I wish them well. Okay. I was like, how long are they going to be around? And middle finger to the world, you're still here, right? So
Yeah.
what is it that's the difference? Because there's a difference here.
Yeah, it's a good question. We can really unpack that. I think where I would start is probably the product and the problem to solve. For us, we really focused on how can we deliver a really high quality product that's really convenient and not compromise on either of those two things. And we think most of the alternatives that are solving mealtime compromise on one of those two. So I think that's the first place. I think the second place is the product experience is magical, and it really has been since day one. It's gotten a lot better, but we've heard it over and over again. Probably every week, someone tells us the product is life changing. People use it a crazy amount, and I think that more than anything is the reason why we've been able to get to the point we have. Certainly, there's some testament to our team and our ability to persevere through adversity, but I think more than anything, it's the fact that you scan a QR code and in 15 minutes you get something that's delicious. Like, it's not that complicated.
And we should probably pause just so for those people that don't know, the premise is you sign up and you get this device, this oven, which you'll explain what it does because it does a lot of things.
Correct.
And then you get the subscription-based meals that arrive that are fresh.
Correct.
So
you buy the oven. It's a countertop oven. It works on its own. So it's not just for our food. You can use it to toast bread. There's a mobile app that has 200 recipes on it. If you want to make shakshuka or if you want to roast a piece of salmon, you just push one button and the oven does it for you. And you can bake cookies, all manners of things. It's a steam oven too. So if you want to bake stuff, it keeps it extra moist. And then it's designed for our food. And so the oven is Wi-Fi enabled. You order our meals, they arrive fresh at your doorstep, but they're prepared. So the salmon is the perfect size. It's paired with rice and broccoli or with pasta or whatever it is. Every week there's 25 different meals on the menu, and everything you need to prepare the meal is in the little box. You put it in the oven, you scan a QR code, the oven downloads the perfect way to cook that meal from the cloud, and then 20 minutes later, 15 minutes later, you get a push notification that your meal is done cooking. And part of the idea here was, when you cook food for yourself, let's say you're making grains, you have to boil the grains and you have to lower it to simmer. Let's say you're cooking a piece of fish, like you start at a low temperature, finish at a high temperature, or the other way around. All of that is automated in the oven. So it's changing temperatures, it's changing methods of heating, but you're not doing anything. And so that's how we can deliver on an amazing high quality product, but ask the customer to just scan a QR code.
And that like I'm glad you said that, because I whenever I see companies, and especially companies like yours that are disrupting, I sort of try and decode it myself, right? And I go, and I think about your thing is like, when you think in terms of competition, you have sort of competition on three layers, right? In some sense, you have a competition in terms of a decision, like I'm going to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And in many senses, that's probably the easier one. I don't know. I would love your reaction. But then there's a sort of um, a level of competition in terms of use and continuation of use. So it's like there's a decision criteria, then there's ultimately the choice, but then there's use and sustained use, because I would imagine your business lives and dies on people's consistent use of the program.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could see the novelty of looking at it, oh, wow, that's really cool. And I like the idea of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I could see myself getting over the hump, because I could be talked into very easily the difference between some of the other home delivery meal kit things for all the reasons you just said, right? But
Yeah.
the consistent usage of it is the one that interests me most. And that's like, I think, where you've nailed it.
Yeah, it's funny. We nailed the consistency first. So
Ah,
when we launched from the beginning, people were ordering really consistently and for an extended period of time, especially when compared to anyone doing meal kit or prepared food. Our retention was 3 to 5 times higher than the next closest companies. But it took us about 2 years to figure out how to sell the product and really sell it. Like we were moving some units, but we're venture backed. The expectations are we're going to grow very quickly, especially in the early days. And it took us about 2 years and a little bit to actually figure out how to do that. Now that we have, I think both of those are probably equal challenges. Like, how do we continue to grow at a fast rate? And then how do we improve on our retention? But early on, I think because of the complexity of the product, in some ways, it was hard for us to figure out how do we position ourselves to potential customers, and how do you get over the hump of, where am I going to put this on my countertop? Am I really going to pay this much money for an oven before I've tried the food? Am I going to commit to this extended period of time on the food program? And I've never heard of this company. So, like, lots of different barriers to adoption for a new customer, that it took us a while to figure out how do we make that a little less friction, remove the friction from where for a while it was hard.
got it. And talk about the journey, because when you and I first met, we talked about it. You had a really fascinating story. A couple of really funny parts to that story. But you go to school, and then you land up in the restaurant business. You work for two different chains, if I remember correctly, and I was
Mhm.
listening. Um, and then you go back to you go to business school. You go to Booth, right?
Correct.
And then in during Booth, you come up with ideas. So walk us through that journey, because it's in some sense like probably a conventional startup journey. In some other sense, was kind of like serendipitous and weird. Is the best
Yeah,
way I can describe it.
I think that's right. I had a very winding career before I started Tovala. I moved to China for a period of time and taught English out there. I ran a frozen yogurt chain. I worked for the founder of the Veggie Grill, a plant-based restaurant chain. And each of these roles, either they were entrepreneurial out of the gates, or I found a way to make them entrepreneurial. Um, because I think that's just my nature. Like, I'm an entrepreneurial guy. I don't do well with too much structure or people telling me exactly what to do. And so in all those roles, I found a way to, build something entrepreneurial. I worked for a PR firm for a period of time, which the lessons there actually served me very well at Tovala later on. And then after I got into business school, I started a mobile app as a side project. Really, it was just for fun. And that was what really opened my eyes up to the tech industry and how tech moves a lot faster. There's a lot more innovation in tech, and how, okay, I had this passion for food, but now I thought maybe I can marry that with a passion for technology as well. And so that when I went into business school, I was thinking, okay, can I combine this passion for food with this passion for technology and start something? I was very clear eyed at business school that I wanted to start my own business, but I didn't know what I wanted to do, and so I was searching for an idea. I was, came up with a few others, but then ultimately with Tovala, what happened was, I had a problem that I wanted to solve, like I shared a little earlier in the podcast. And I knew, okay, I want to start a company. I've got this problem I want to solve. Let me first see, am I alone in this problem, or are there other people that similarly would benefit from a solution like this, or at least are currently struggling with getting a high quality, really convenient meal on the table 2 or 3 nights a week, or maybe for some lunches. And starting to talk to a lot of people, it was clear this was definitely not a me problem. This is a universal problem. And so we went about trying to solve it. And that was kind of the beginning of Tovala.
And what, since I butchered the name, where's the name come from? Where's Tovala? What does it mean? How did you come up with it?
So it's Tovala for all the listeners out there. It's really a play on 2 words. So first, the Italian word for table, which is Tovala. We always like the idea of people sitting around a table enjoying our meal. And then the Hebrew word tov. I like that word, and it was kind of implanted in my brain when we were trying to come up with the name. The reality is we came up with the name in early 2016 when the business was still really in its infancy, and we didn't know exactly how the product was going to evolve. And so we thought, let's try to come up with something that's neutral in case the business evolves in a direction we don't anticipate. And so that was the primary driver. And then we really wanted it to be Tovala.com, and we wanted the trademark. So it's really hard these days to find something that checks all those boxes.
Yep.
And I feel pretty good. There's people like you, Clive, that butcher it from time to time, but that's okay. As our awareness grows, I think the number of people that do that will come down.
There's a campaign in that. There's an idea in that, playing
You're
on the name.
probably right.
Although I would tell you that that's a classic move for a seasoned startup founder, which is make sure your name allows you to pivot and evolve over time, and don't paint yourself into a corner. Now, I heard you talk once in jest, but I think there's an element of truth to this. The difference between a project and a business, and I think if I remember correctly, it was in the context of a joke with your parents or a joke about your parents. But if you remember that story, bring it back, because I do think there's truth in. There's a moment when you sort of evolve from project to a business, and then from a startup business to a growth business. And I'd love to hear that story anyway.
Yeah. So I was working on Tovala while I was in business school, and I was not recruiting for other jobs because this is what I wanted to do. But when I was in business school, it was definitely still a project. I was taking it through classes. I had a business plan in Microsoft Word. We had a prototype, but I think by all definitions, it was a project. There was no revenue. We weren't a formed LLC or C Corp. Like, everything about it was a project. But it would still nag at me when people would say, how's your project going? Because for me, it was my life. Like, I was going to do this after graduation, and I was going to turn it into a real business. And then we won the New Venture Challenge at the University of Chicago. And I think for some people, it shifted. It's like, oh, maybe this is actually a real thing. Now there's some funding. But I think psychologically for me, it probably wasn't until we hired someone, and then actually took in outside capital, where it was like, oh, this is no longer a project. This is a startup. We're paying salaries. There's people's jobs on the line. We've taken some money. We have to deliver on it. I think that was probably the big psychological switch from project to startup.
Huh.
And then I think from startup to growth is a different story. Like that I think, hard to say when that happened, but for us, there was definitely the pre-launch phase. Like, you're building the product and just building it. There are no customers. Then there is post-launch. We have customers, we're operating, but we don't have product market fit. Then we found product market fit, and it was like, oh my God, we're growing really fast, but we're just focused on how do we grow and scale. And then at some point between finding product market fit 3 years ago and where we are today, we entered what I called more of like the scaled growth phase.
Right.
And I think time is distorted a little bit because of COVID, but certainly there has been a big shift in how our company operates, how we get things done, the stakes at which we're operating, the scrutiny we have on our P&L, like all things that I think are pretty defining of probably a later stage business versus how we were operating when nobody knew what they were doing and we're just kind of running around with our heads cut off trying to stay afloat.
Right. And then importantly, when you move from project to business, your parents, in particular your mom, don't think you're a complete loser.
Yes, exactly.
So, and I'm interested because you've gone through this journey, and you've gone through this journey in an incredibly tough environment, as in COVID. Um, but as a leader, going from grinding it out in B school and developing the plan, and then transfer, and then going through all of those stages, how have you, and importantly your role and how you approach your role, evolved? Because I imagine it has to dramatically evolve. And you've heard all these classic stories of founder gets to a point in scale where they no longer have the skill set or the mindset, and oftentimes it's the mindset, not the skill set, that has to evolve.
Hmm.
So how have you handled that journey? Because you definitely have evolved over that time.
Yeah, I think I'm really fortunate that my general temperament is pretty well suited to a later stage company to begin with. I was always a big believer in giving my team a lot of autonomy. So certainly there were a lot of things that I did personally really hands on in the early days, but there were a lot of things I didn't. My co-founder understood technology and hardware engineering in a way that I never could, never would. And so I gave him the reins. I'm like, it's your job. You deliver an oven in a certain time frame and be responsible for that. And I didn't meddle, and that was true in a lot of pockets of the business. So I think where other founders tend to struggle of like having to give away those Legos and start to operate more of a leader than a doer, I think I was in that mode pretty early on. There's certain things like recruiting is a great example where I was in charge of recruiting for a really long time. And then even once we hired a recruiter, I still wanted to interview every single person, even if it was someone that I would never interact with, never work with, probably have very little insight into their day-to-day job. That was one where up until it was like so clearly becoming a bottleneck that I needed 30 minutes with every candidate, I didn't want to let go of. But on the whole, I didn't struggle to let go of Legos. And I think the transition to being a leader at a growth stage company from early stage company was not as painful for me as it has been for some peers that I've seen. But certainly my job is 1,000% different than what it was 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And I think about, I remember I had a conversation with someone when we were like 25 people. And I think he was saying like, hey, it's right around now, like you're going to stop actually knowing your team very well. And that wasn't true for us. Like it didn't happen at 25, but at some point, it was probably middle of last year, corporate team was over 100 and we were hiring quickly. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, I can barely keep up with the names of the new people we're hiring. And that was a really new feeling for me where it was like how they perceive our culture and my leadership and our executive team will be second, third hand, in front of the whole company when I give a talk, in my emails to the whole company, in some of the decisions I make, as opposed to being able to lead one to one or one to three. Like I have to lead on a much broader way now than I did early on.
And it requires a huge amount of, I'd say, both sort of maturity, confidence, trust. I mean, this is your baby, right?
Mm-hmm.
On a conceptual level, but in reality, this is what's paying the bills, and so there's a lot of sweat equity involved. And so, I mean, is it just the way you wired, or is it just like it's incredibly hard? I mean, I'm like OCD, right? So it's like, how do you what goes through your brain when you go, I gotta let these people do what they do?
I've just never struggled with that. I think just intellectually, I've always understood and like internalized that I have very few skills and the people I'm hiring actually understand what they're being hired to do. And I don't. Like I don't know how to make a great meal. I can taste it and give my opinion, but even my opinion on our food to me is like I'm one opinion and I'm not representative of our target customer. So like the team would hear me over and over again give feedback, but always caveat it with like, please do not take that as an accidental mandate. Like, it's just my opinion. Talk to other people, talk to our customers. Like, that's what really matters. And I think that was true for a lot of different parts of the business, not just the technology side, but everyone has an opinion on marketing.
Yep.
And I try not to have too strong of an opinion because I just have an opinion. I'm not a schooled marketer.
Right.
There's areas where I think I have good instincts and I'll lean in, but on the whole, I think because that's how I always approached it, it wasn't harder as the business got bigger and the stakes got higher for me to say, hey, all right, you guys go do it. I'm going to step back.
Got it. And what is it about Booth? I mean, University of Chicago, like, so is it in the culture? There's so many people go in there and come out as, and the startup sort of psychology feels like there's something in the water, or maybe it's just the coincidence that I happen to be talking to a ton of startup people who are from there, and that's not representative. Is there something going on there? Is it part of the culture? Is there? Did you feel? Did you go in there with a sense that's what I want to do? Or is it part of something you picked up in there?
Yeah, I definitely went there knowing I wanted to start my own company, but I wouldn't say there's like a deep culture of entrepreneurship at Booth. I found the pockets there that were incredibly supportive and well networked and like could help me in a big way, but I didn't find that to be kind of representative of the overall culture at Booth. And I think at least, it's been a decade since I started there, but when I started, we were a class of 600 and I remember in the first week my friend and I organized a pitch session. We're like, hey, anyone that has an idea that's thinking about starting a business, let's do a pitch session. And I think we had 150 people come. So there's this huge amount of
Incredible.
interest in entrepreneurship. But then as time progressed, that 150 like got shrunk and shrunk and shrunk, as the recruiters come to campus and you see your friends getting recruited by these cool companies and they take you out and the salaries look great and the prospect of starting a company and not making any money, that starts to become less and less attractive as the reality of graduation and impending unemployment sets in. The 150 ultimately was less than 10 when we graduated of people actually graduating and going to start their own companies.
Got it. Well, in that sense, then becomes there's a weeding out I'd say the weak in terms of will and ideas,
Yes.
and getting to something. Because once you're at that point, now you're in. I mean, there's a part of it, and I don't know if it's you who said. Someone said this to me once. I might be ascribing it to you, but it's not critical who said it. It was kind of, I said, if you knew if you knew then what you know now, given the pain that you've gone through, and by the way, this is probably any person who's done a startup, would you
Yeah.
do it again? And generally the answer is no. Very often the answer is no. And so there's a
Yeah.
certain beauty in going, I don't know everything and I don't want to know really, because if I know it, I probably won't do it. The
Yeah.
ignorance is to a degree somewhat, I would say, bliss, but liberating.
It's a really funny thing because early in my journey, I used to wonder why VCs would ever back first time founders. It's like, oh, why don't you just back second time founders? Because then they'll know what they're doing. And it wasn't until I had some perspective to get to the conclusion you just did of like, my sense is most second time founders are not going to be naive enough to try to build something crazy. There's exceptions, don't get me wrong, but
Yep.
to your point, like I don't think I would go do this again knowing what I know now. But I didn't know. So we were willing to try something totally crazy. And I think that's why VCs bet on first time founders. Like that naivete is actually a real
It's an
positive.
asset.
It's that's how you build something big and question the conventional wisdom.
Well, I see. It's funny. I see that in Screen Dragon. We were talking about Screen Dragon before we started. Is the founding team went into this with an idea, and they got to a point where there was no turning back. It was
Mm-hmm.
only well, ultimately there is a turning back, but the mindset was like we can only go forwards, and so there was the inevitable pivots along the way, and the company's now in their fourth pivot, and incredibly successful in doing that. But I've never heard about it. I've never heard it articulated that way, but it's a powerful insight that the first time founder sort of doesn't know any better, and that's actually an asset, assuming all the other things hold true in terms of basic intelligence and things like
Yes.
that. But
Yeah.
the other thing that strikes me is like every time I talk to you, I walk away with this feeling like the guy is so incredibly calm and sort of like you know yogi like just chill. And I know the reality of your life. I mean, just the complexity of the conceit of the idea, and then having to scale this company, through in the absolute, and then through COVID. The fact that you're in the hardware, software, and food, and the fact that you make your own food, which that's my understanding.
Yeah.
And I don't know if have you gone live with it. Last we talked, you were going to do the West Coast plant.
We have a facility in Salt Lake
Faci-
City.
Right.
Yeah.
So, like, this is a lot of craziness in the time, and incredibly successful in raising, with a lot of investors who have high expectations, and yet there's this sort of calmness. Is this a facade, or is this just
Uh,
demands? Like, how do you do this? What goes on? How do you process?
yeah, it's a great question. It's not a facade. This is who I am. Um,
It's either damn good facade, because I always see it when I run into you. So you've rehearsed it well.
yeah, no, I've gotten this feedback for a long time. I think it's just who I am. Maybe it's some combination of upbringing and uh, I try not to take anything too seriously. And to rattle me, I think it has to be something really, really, really bad. And I think that served us really well at Tovala because it has not been up and to the right for 7 years. We've had a lot of adversity, and I think my ability to maintain calm during some of those crises really helped the team maintain calm and help everyone believe like this is not the worst thing in the world. We will survive. And now that is probably one of the most defining traits of our culture. Is anytime there's an obstacle, we just embrace it. It's like we've been here before. This will make us stronger. We will come out better. Um, and I think it's just my personality, to be honest, as opposed to some kind of learned trait. I think
Yeah.
that's just who I am.
And I can imagine it's a huge deal, because I mean, the you were scaling, and I don't have all the chronology right, but essentially the most crucial time of your scaling happened in COVID. And, like, having come from where I come from, the notion of a food manufacturing business having to operate in a COVID environment must have been a nightmare. I mean, talk about stuck. In that, in the absolute, and then doing that as a startup in a crucial time. Like, talk about that journey and how you guys confronted it.
Yeah, so it actually started about 7 months before COVID. We found product market fit in September of 2019, and the business just took off. And so, the world you come from, where it's like we're going to grow 10% a year, so we can plan and we can hire the right amount of people in our facility and procure labor, procure ingredients, and whatever. All of a sudden, we were growing 10 to 20% per week. And these are not like insignificant volumes. We were in a tiny, tiny company. We were
Yep.
talking like this was material changes in every week in terms of the number of people we needed in our facilities to produce food, the amount of food we actually needed, like the packaging, everything around our food production, which happens on a weekly basis. And it was growing so fast and it came out of nowhere. Like we knew we had to find product market fit or we would die, but we couldn't plan for it operationally or it would be too expensive. Like we couldn't overstaff for 2 years in the hope of, hey, one day we're going to grow really fast. And we didn't have an HR department. And that happened in September of 19. And so the business tripled in size from September of 19 until the end of 19. So in a 4 month span,
It's
we grew
incredible.
like crazy. And we all came into 2020 thinking, okay, we did it. We grew a ton. We're going to go raise a big round of capital. We'll be able to hire a lot more people and the pressure will come off. But we need to maintain focus while we're raising money in Q1. And then the world fell apart. And so I think there was like okay, we've been operating in this mode for a while, so it's not new. Like obviously there's a lot new with COVID, but operating with adversity and a lot of things that was not new. But what was very hard was, thinking that you've pushed the boulder to the top of the hill and then it rolls all the way back down. And it's like, oh my God, it's us again that we have to push it all the way back to the top. That was very difficult. I will say for a lot of our team, especially the team that was going into the facilities regularly, there was some measure of community that came from doing that a lot of other people lost during
Yep.
COVID. And so our operations team, even though it was a very, very difficult year, I think they found camaraderie amongst themselves of we're in this together. We're actually together. Hopefully we're going to be safe and healthy, but we don't know. And so I think that was maybe a silver lining for some members of our team, but undoubtedly that was like incredibly stressful. Managing that combined with a corporate team that had gone mostly remote created a whole bunch of cultural challenges for us, all the while we're still trying to grow really quickly and keep our team safe.
It's incredible. And to your point, there's a through line here in terms of that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger. There's the notion of the ingredients as I look around with a clear sense of where you want to go, and a inherent sort of cultural calmness, not complacency, but a sort of calmness and maturity that says we're inevitably going to have bumps in the road, and some of them are going to be potholes and some of them may be sinkholes, but we know how to navigate these things. And then having done that, because there's one thing to say intellectually, here's how we're going to react when we have this happen. The other is to say it happened and we got through it the other side, builds an institutional sort of grit and resilience that is scalable.
Yes.
That does insulate you. Because I was thinking about this the other night when I was thinking about this conversation, is like on the surface you go, you got to be nuts to want to go into a business that is complex as yours, that has all three. On the other hand, the flip side of that is it's a moat. I mean, it's a barrier to entry. And if you crack it, boy, it's going to be, you're going to get a gap between you and any other lunatic who wants to come into the space.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And I always felt like, the more people think we're crazy, the better. That probably means. Like, it means the prize is bigger. And, if you want to do something really differentiated and innovative, most people will think you're crazy. I think that's kind of definition. And that was always our pitch. Like, we never denied that it was going to be really hard. We're like, this is a really hard business, but we're going to build a team of great operators and executors. And if we can get to the other side, we've got this huge lead of a really unique, better product than anyone else. And the bigger we get, the bigger that moat becomes.
Well, I can say, and I have no commercial interest involved, it is a better product and I've enjoyed it. I go over to Jeff and eat at his office. But so how do I find you? How do let's say people are listening and go, holy crap, I didn't know about Tovala. Where do I go? How do I get it? Where do I buy it?
We're direct to consumer. So if you go to tovala.com, you can get the oven. And if you commit to ordering 6 times, you get the oven for just $99. So it's a really approachable entry price. Meals are between $9.99 to $12.99 for the most part. We've got some premium items. And like I said, menu changes every week. And there'll be new stuff coming in the holidays. So people should take a look at our website there. There might be some deals to be had.
Amen to that. Listen, I really appreciate you making time. It's been such a happy coincidence connecting the dot between me walking into the pop-up store when it opened up way back when, to meeting you in the flesh, to having this conversation. And it's just an extraordinary story and of Unstuck and sort of innovating and disrupting a category. And I find it inspirational. So I appreciate you taking the time to chat.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been a pleasure meeting you and hanging out. Thanks for having me on here.
Amen. Thank you.
This podcast was brought to you by Screen Dragon. We break down barriers, make work flow, and unlock talent. Visit screendragon.com to see our software in action.